Okay, no judge.
No judge.
This is a no frill tutorial to our puffer vest pattern to make one of these cute little numbers. This one is actually made by Jane. She's in the studio right now. But we're gonna start with everything that you'll need to make your very own puffer vest. First requirement, pattern. I printed this out both ways. There's the letter version and then there's also the full size pattern. But I'm gonna show you how to assemble this. So we're gonna use this one. Another requirement, slippers. You cannot be a sewer unless you're wearing slippers. We will also need some polyfill. I have a huge bag of this, so this is just a little piece of it. But you can get this at Joann's in tiny little bags. A little goes a long way. You'll also need some chalk or anything to mark your fabric with. This is a heat dissolvable pen and then, I don't know what it's called, but these are dissolvable. You'll also need a zipper, a Sharpie, and then some fabric scissors. Do not try to use regular at-home scissors. They will not work for you. Oh, you will also need some tape to secure your pattern together. There are 4 different options or routes that you can go in terms of making the outer shell of your puffer vest. So logo that's going to show on the outside. But before we get into that, you will need 2 other different types of material. This is a liner fabric, and then this is called a muslin fabric. Both of these are woven. That does matter. If you try to use some sort of stretchy material, your sewing will not go well. So let's get into our options for step number 1, which is cutting. That's step number 2. After we assemble our pattern, let's get into all the different types of options that we can use for the facing material. People love using jerseys. This is for the classic jersey vest pattern that we cut down the middle. You just want to make sure that this is at minimum a large or extra large so you have enough fabric to make the whole look. Another really easy way to make this look is easy and affordable way to make this look is using an old flag you have lying around. You can also buy these secondhand on eBay for like 10 bucks. And this gives you way more than enough material. One of my favorite options is using a beach towel. Similar to how this turned out, this is made from an old towel as well. And then the option that people like most is doing a patchwork look. When you're doing a patchwork look, you can use any material, any size, any feel. Basically, you're taking a bunch of little pieces of fabric, sewing them together in a big sheet of fabric, so then you can cut your pattern out of it. But this is called a tracing wheel, and we're going to trace our pattern onto a thicker paper. You can cut out your pattern size if you want, but if you want to make multiple sizes, I would recommend using a tracing wheel, so you don't have to print it out 100 times. Spilled it. It's so dirty. We're back. Frank and some Starbucks, and we're ready to get sewing. I'll be using this jersey for our upcycle, and I'm just drawing a line down the center and then tracing my left and my right side out with chalk. Just cut out the front patch on the jersey and sew it back on just because I think it's a fun detail, but you don't have to do that. That's just a design choice. After that, I'm finding the center on the back and then laying my back pattern down. Keep in mind, I'm cutting on the fold, so it's going to be one piece that you flip the back pattern from left to right. Now I'm cutting my collar out, and I want 2 different details on the collar, so I just folded it in half, and then I'm cutting out the left and the right piece, and then I'm gonna stitch those together to make one long piece. But this jersey is porous, meaning it has tiny holes in it, so I'm basting it and then going to lay it onto a piece of muslin If you don't do this, when you stuff it, all of the stuffing will come through the holes. So I just like to do this to keep it secure and try not to let it stick together because it is a bitch to try and stick. I'm laying this over 2 layers of muslin because we'll need a muslin layer, our facing layer, and a liner piece. My phone died last night when I thought I was recording this step, so I just cut these out as an example. But after you cut each of your fabrics out, you'll end up with your facing. This is what's going to show on the outside. Your muslin, which is called a backing, and then your lining. So we're going to create a hamburger situation with these two so that we can stuff it. And then we'll save this for a few steps from now. So we lay all of our facing pieces right side facing down. So we lay our muslin over our facing like this, and then I mark this with a Sharpie to give you guys a better visual. We're going to stitch starting here, sew these together, but we're going to leave the armhole side open. So repeat that on the other front piece and then also the back panel. You can leave either side open, but as long as one side is open, you're good to go. After I stitch all of my facing pieces to the muslin, I'm making sure that I left the armholes open and then a tiny section on the collar so I can stuff it. After we get all of those laid out, we're grabbing our liner pieces and taking the collar liner and stitching it to the top of our collar. Marking the right side of the liner just so you guys can see what's going on, but we're going to do right sides touching. So we'll be running a 1/4 of an inch stitch down the top of the collar. After that, we're opening it up and running a top stitch. This just makes it look finished and clean and nice, but you don't have to do this. You can skip this step. I forgot to leave a little hole at the bottom, so I'm just stitch ripping about 4 to 6 inches of an opening, and then I'll be running my puffer stitches across each of my panels. This is what's going to allow us to stuff those even layers of puffiness. So we're going to sew from the side that is stitched down the front where we're going to put the zipper. But I always grab a piece of tissue if I'm stitching over a press-on or a vinyl, because what you'll find out very quickly is if you don't do that, it will not sew very nicely and look flat and even. After we create our little channels, we're just going to be stuffing. This takes quite a while, so just do your best to get it all even. I would underestimate how much you think you need. A lot of people have a tendency to overstuff, and I promise you less is more. Once that's complete, we're gonna close up all of our openings. So I'm sewing from the muslin side down, because if we sew from the facing side down, it can sometimes stretch weird, and we have that vinyl on that side, so it's just easier to sew from the muslin down. Now we're going to assemble all of our pieces, but making sure we put our pockets in first. This step is optional, but I go 1 inch down from each pit, so you can mark it and pin it. I've made so many of these I can kind of just go eyeball it, but after we pin everything, we're doing a 1/4 of an inch stitch down each pocket, and then similar to the collar, we're running a top stitch over it. So repeat that on all 4 sides, and then we'll take it back to the cutting table. Now that we have all of our pockets secured, we're going to attach the front pieces to the back panel, and we're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. So that just covers all of the white stitching that I use. And by the way, I use white stitching just so you guys can see what I'm doing, but I typically would change out the color to black or, whatever blends in with your fabric. So now when we go to stitch the sides where the pocket is, again, 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going to start it off, hit it with the back stitch a couple of times just to make sure it's not going anywhere. As soon as we get a 1/2 inch down to where the pocket is, we're going to pivot it at 90 degrees and then continue our stitch all the way around the pocket. This is called a hidden inseam pocket. It's the easiest way to do a pocket. There's 10 other ways, but we can make a separate video on those. I'm such an amateur when it comes to content creating. This video took me like 10 hours to edit because I had so much footage. But we'll get through it. So after we finish this pocket, we're just going to hit the other side with the same thing. Now it's time to attach the collar. Because I split my pattern piece into 2 separate little styles, I just match the middle of the collar to the middle of the back before I start sewing. But we're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance here as well, and then just run that stitch all the way down. Right now I'm just sewing my tag on, and if you don't have a tag, you can make your own or leave it blank, or, totally up to you, but I think it's so cute to put it in the center of the back, and you definitely want to sew it onto the lining before you assemble your piece. After we sew the liner together, we're laying it wrong sides touching on the inside of the puffer. So tag facing up. This part is really tricky, but we're going to grab wrong sides facing, but we need the right sides facing. So we're going to flip up the bottom, keeping in mind where the seam is, and we're going to touch that bottom seam to right where the pocket is, right sides facing, and throw a pin in it. I don't typically pin because I just know where everything goes by now, but feel free to pin all the way around so we're not sewing the lining in upside down, Same thing with the top seam, wrong sides facing, and then we're going to take the bottom of the fabric, flip it so that our right sides are facing. I feel like this is really difficult to explain, so I'll have to get a better shot and post another video on this as well. So let me know if you guys have any questions in the comments. But we're going to pin all the way around, and then before we pin the other side, we're going to stitch this one first so it doesn't go anywhere. And again, here we are going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Just go slow with this because it can get really funky, but just focus on what you're stitching. Don't focus on the rest of it getting jumbled. Just keep going all the way around the hole. It'll look something like this when you're done. Yeah, so we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're going to pin it, sew all the way around. Again, it is tricky, so it might take you about 30 minutes or so to wiggle it through. But after we have both armholes done, we're going to work on attaching the collar. So I did mark the right side of the liner on the bodice and then also the collar. The best way to do this is throw your hands in there. And again, right sides touching. So we're just going to match both those markings up and go for it. Pull it through, throw a pin on it. It's going to look weird. It's going to feel weird. It's going to be difficult to sew, but just trust where you pinned it and follow that line from the edge of the collar to the other edge. So 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to run a straight stitch. 2 more steps, guys. Well, 3. Right about now, we're going to grab our zipper and make sure you confirm the right side of your zipper, meaning where the zipper pulls down. You're going to flip that kind of like upside down So the right side of the zipper is touching the right side of your puffer. Run a straight stitch all the way along the edge of the zipper down to the bottom, and make sure you back stitch the bottom just so it doesn't come unraveled. After that, we're going to take our chalk and mark where the liner meets the collar, where the collar meets the bodice, and then where our puffer lines are. If you didn't grab the right length, you can just fold back the excess and then just tack that in there. Just make sure not to go over the zipper or else you'll break your needle. So I'm just cutting that off and then taking the other side of the zipper and matching the chalk lines up to the other markings on the other side. Same as the other side, we're just going to run a straight stitch close to the zipper all the way down and tack the excess of the zipper. If you don't tack it and you just cut it straight off, your zipper will just fall off. So make sure you tack it. I always like to test to make sure the front graphic lines up. So after that's good to go, we're taking our liner and we're folding it back over the front facing of the fabric. So this also is going to be very difficult and weird feeling, but you're just going to keep pulling it, the right side of the liner to the right side of the puffer. And you're going to stitch that all the way down along the zipper. I usually take my finger and kind of poke out the edges, but after you do both sides, the only thing we have left is stitching the bottom. So similar to attaching the collar, you're going to put your hands in and flip it inside out. I match up the seams on both sides, pin those, and then I'm just putting a green marker here to let you guys know to leave an opening. I leave probably about 8 inches of an opening so that I can carefully flip my puffer right side out. Emphasis on careful because you don't want to rip anything and have to go back in and redo it. So I'm poking the corners out with my finger again, and then now you can do what's called a blind stitch, but I always just do a top stitch because the blind stitch never looks right to me. So I'm following the edge of the puffer and running a straight stitch all across the bottom to secure that opening. And after that, you're just going to want to give it a good steam to get all of that chalk off and flatten out any lines. That's it. Now you have the cutest little custom puffer vest. I'm so obsessed. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm sure you will in the comments, and I can try to make a more in-depth video on that. Bye.